Uno, dos, tres, catorce.
Welcome to another special edition episode of Conversational Pace. I have the 2024 Leadville champion and course record holder, David Roche, with me today. Also a fantastic coach, has coached numerous athletes to, accolades of eons long. The scroll of coaching accomplishments it's up there. But David, thank you for sitting down and chatting with me today. We're going to do a little gear, nutrition, Leadville rundown, as you know, that part of the sport has gotten just so much bigger in the past years. You know, you've talked about it on your podcast multiple times, like the food doping era. I think we're potentially getting into the shoe doping era too.
Definitely.
Definitely something that we'll dive into. But first off, how are you feeling? We're only a few days removed from the race.
Yeah, we're Tuesday after the Saturday race. I'm feeling great to be here. I love Brett freaking Hornig. Tell everybody who will listen. He has made me feel so seen and validated over the course of years and Instagram messages back and forth. So this is an honor. Also, I wanted to make this, I got that traditional, after you have some race like this, you get asked to be on a lot of podcasts. Like everyone's used to seeing like Courtney does something, then Courtney will be on like 5 podcasts. I was like, the first one I'm on is with Brett. So I'm here and we're going to talk some fun stuff.
Oh man, it's such an honor. And, kind of like you had been very, public about your goals for the race. Like I was not afraid to ask you before the race of
I
like,
know, right?
David,
You
you
shot the
want
shot.
to hop on? Like it's regardless of how it goes, probably going to go well. Let's talk about the race. And like,
I took that as belief in me. Like,
yeah.
I mean, because, I feel like I don't know exactly what's happening, but I've gotten forwarded so many messages in this process of like people making backhanded compliment comments after the race. Like, absolutely didn't think that was possible. Like, or whatever, like it's just
Pretty good for
weird
a
comments.
coach.
Yeah, or whatever. Or like maybe his ITRA score, why is it so low? When this is going to be like a 970 or whatever. And I don't know. For me, I was like Brett's one of the real ones because Brett has been about this game. I'm going to be on that podcast. I can't wait. So if it had gone badly, I would have loved to sit here and make funny jokes about how much I suck. But right now we can talk about things that worked.
Triumphed. So much
Yeah.
success out there. Yeah. So I guess if for some people who are listening, they might not be too familiar with the Leadville course. If you could give like a 30-second like elevator
definitely.
pitch of like just the Leadville race, like what do we see out there?
Yeah, so it's a pretty simple course to describe that fast because for 36 miles to Twin Lakes, you're going from Leadville, basically across rolling terrain, probably 5,000 or 6,000 feet of vert, but trail running, all very high elevation, but fast. It's a running economy course at that point, and it rewards people who can run fast and run fast at low heart rates. But then you have a 25-mile section that's out and back from Twin Lakes to Twin Lakes from 37 to 62 that is pure mountain running. The backside of Hope Pass is nasty. It is 1,100, 1,200 feet per mile at altitude with rocks, true mountain running, and puts European trails to shame. Yeah, I'll say it. No, I'm just kidding. But it's true mountain running. This makes sense. So you need to be proficient in the mountains, though you can get by without being an expert for sure. And then you have the same return section from Twin Lakes. So it rewards a bunch of different styles of running. And I mean, I think there's a reason that the course record before was held by Matt Carpenter, who's probably, the greatest of all time mountain runner, pure mountain runner, at least like in the way Babe Ruth is the greatest of all time baseball player. Like it's a different era, but an absolute legend. So, the reason he had the course record before. And I was hoping going in that given the demands of that terrain, given that I'm pretty good at altitude, I could probably do pretty well there. And then, competing with Matt, he's a much better athlete than I'll ever be, just to be 100% honest as a coach. So what I'd have to do is ride the wave of performance that we're seeing across running in particular, and, basically apply everything that coaching has taught us to myself.
Okay. I know, like right before we started recording, I was like,
Yeah.
I'm going to try not to go into the coaching X's and O's too much. Okay. But one question, did Did you have a coach for this race, or did you write all your own training?
Megan and I do everything together, so with each other. So, it's all just collaborative back and forth. We love
Mm.
talking about it at dinner with Leo, our baby, all the time. So, Megan's the best coach in the world, and getting to go back and forth with her on this is great. And then basically that's how we do all of it. Like, for every, especially professional athletes we coach, we're always talking about how we're thinking about it and going back and forth. And so it's wonderful because it's almost like a journal club. And for me, I get to do it with the smartest person I've ever met, who I think is literally has a claim to being the best coach in the entire world. So, yeah, it's super fortunate in that regard. So we've been thinking about this since I decided to go for it back in January or December of this year. So I registered for the 50 miler in Leadville to race my way in to
Mm.
this one. And so this entire year has been thinking, okay, this was the A goal to get out there and give my first 100 miler a try.
That's hard. I mean, it's scary to have an A goal so many months out, and
Yeah.
then to just be thinking and working upon. But I think we've seen with a lot of like current training science, it's that like if you like periodize things correctly, it's like what you're doing 7, 8 months out, like absolutely can count towards the race in August.
Oh,
Um,
definitely. I mean, I think basically bricks upon bricks upon bricks. Like
mhm,
this, on our podcast today, we did basically a 2-hour recap of this crap. Not the training part, but the journey of it. And Megan made a great point, which is, David, you had this within you when you were that 18-year-old football player who quit college football to become a runner, like, or to get it and eventually got into running. You always had this within you. It was that every single day you showed up, even on your rest days, you just showed up.
mhm,
And eventually this thing that feels like a breakthrough, like it gets back to the old axiom that every overnight success is a decade in the making.
mhm.
And yeah, so that's always the way we approach it. And it's kind of fun as a coach because like coming into this race, another thing I've been forwarded a bunch is people being like comments like, everyone said, how do you coach 100 milers when you haven't done one? I'm like, who was saying that? I haven't heard anybody say that. I don't need to
Everybody,
hear that shit.
everybody.
Everybody. It's like, come on, we've coached winners of all these races. But after the race, I feel like I can be a little bit more confident in some of the things that like we've applied to ourselves, which is primarily that like to do these types of races, you do not need to be hammering yourself into oblivion with really high volume. I do pretty low volume relative to a lot of athletes, but that is resting on this, decades of just kind of grinding it out, constantly building my speed. And now at 36, it's years upon years in the making. So I'm less worried about week to week variation in my training because my training when you zoom out is about things I did in 2014 as much as it is now.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Going back to the course, you mentioned, there's a
Mhm.
huge amount of miles that lend to the efficiency of the runner because you said it's like just a lot of, kind of running.
Yeah.
And especially being up at altitude as well. It's
I
like,
mean, I literally never walked the entire race.
oh my God. Yeah,
But
that's a
granted,
lot of
that's not. Don't do that at home. Like that's not smart. Megan and I have this joke. We call it Team Never Hike, which what that means in practice is that not that you never hike. For most people, it's try to run 1% more, 2% more, even if it feels dumb, because that does add up, and maybe that goes against conventional wisdom. But we've had some good success with our team doing that. But coming into Leadville specifically, I was thinking that, and then Matt Carpenter, I didn't read his training summary from 2005 until after the race, and I'm glad I didn't. But one of the really fun wisdom nuggets in there from this guy who was thinking so smart about training long before his time was that he also never hiked a step, even on those crazy miles on Hope Pass. So maybe there's something to that too, that, with a particular type of course, it rewards it. Or maybe that's just kind of a nugget of wisdom lost to time. And, Swap is kind of rediscovering that this focus on hiking, even if running's the same pace, sometimes running is better than hiking rather than the converse where everyone's like, oh, if hiking is the same as running, you should always hike. It's like, maybe it's a little more complicated than that.
yeah. Yeah. Another member of Team Never Hike that always ingrained that to me here, Hal Kerner.
Oh,
He
cool. I
was
didn't
he
know
was
that.
he was all about, like, running every step of the canyons through the Western States course. He's like, even if it's
He's
the same speed of hiking, he's like, something about never turning off that gear allows you to get rolling again. later.
So cool. Yeah, Drew Holman does that as well.
Mhm.
Superstar. So yeah, we've had so much fun over the years, and Matt Daniels is like that too. Just going into the mountains here around Boulder and just kind of, we call it granny gear. It's not that you're going
Yeah.
hard, you just kind of pitter patter. And I have been passed by hikers before while running, and it doesn't make me feel bad anymore. It's just badge of honor.
I think that kind of transitions well a little bit into like some of the footwear choices for this
Yeah,
race because, we talk about efficiency. It's a lot of running. You went and did, a good amount of training on the course prior to the race, right? So
yeah,
what were some potential options that you were looking at for footwear? Because I know you wore the Mach X for the Silver Rush 50
yeah.
mile before Leadville.
So yeah, I wore the Mach X for the 50 mile, which was pretty chunky and steep race. And it was good. But I learned in that process that like maybe not the ideal. So one, it has a cutout in the bottom, which collects rocks. So that wouldn't work in this type of race, most likely. But two, because of Hope Pass, this course was going to be different. Because of that mountain running, like I do not want to take off my shoes during an ultra. I do not know what people are doing at aid stations, especially having raced one now. I'm like, I want to be in and out as quickly as possible. And Megan like insists. She's just like, get the frick out of here. I was like, I want to hang out. I want to give Leo a fist bump, our baby. She's like, no, you go. So I think one advantage I had was probably aid station technique. And so I was going to wear the same shoes the whole time. So there's these miles that are flowy. There's miles on dirt roads. There's miles on single track trail that are beautiful in the Colorado Trail. But then Hope Pass, I mean, the backside in particular is what I went to go train on. And the first time I trained on it, it made me sore for 5 days, which points out maybe need to do a little bit more vert. But on that, like road shoe, I have no idea how Rob Carrara wore Nike Lunar Racers on this course, or Adrian McDonald wore Endorphin Speed threes a couple years ago or a few years ago when he won. I need trail shoes for this for sure. I need some traction, and so in the course of the build, I was a little unsure on shoes, and then I kind of had the epiphany of essentially how to tie the Adidas Agravic Speed Ultras for my foot, like how to
Mm,
secure them so that the stability issues were solved. And once I did that, I was like, oh, this is the best shoe ever made.
yeah.
And so I'm actually, if anyone's watching this, I'm wearing a Terrex shirt because like I'm not sponsored or anything, but I actually just want to thank them because they made a very good shoe. That shoe is the first one I think that just kind of transcends trails and becomes the type of shoe that I could go onto the track and bust out, 62-second quarters in them too.
Yeah.
It's that good of a shoe.
Yep. I noticed that as well with the Speed Ultra where it legit feels very fast. But it also took me like 40 or 50 miles of running to figure out how to tighten the shoe correctly because the upper is kind of plasticky.
And the sizing is so weird. Like I
Yeah.
wore a size 10 so I'm a 10.5 in Adidas Pro 3, the road super shoe. It's my go-to road super shoe. So like Adidas, clearly I like the feel of it a little bit. So I went to a size 10 because the Agravic Speed Ultras play long, I guess they say.
Mhm.
Yeah,
Yeah.
well, you get the
Yeah.
idea.
No, you're right.
Um, and the 10 I wore for a while. And then I had a run the week after the 50 miler where I ended up calling an Uber to take me home because I was just like, something's wrong. And it just turns out the shoes just were a little too big. They were floppy, weren't working. So went down to the 9.5 and learned over time that I needed to really secure the shoe down with a lacing technique where I did the lace lock and then also laced through the tongue hole. So like
Mm,
um, and that combination with thick socks meant that the shoe did not move under my foot. So I could be really secure on technical terrain. And as soon as I did that, everything clicked into place. And I was like, oh, this is the first trail shoe for sure.
okay.
And so, in setting this course record, like just being realistic and honest, Matt Carpenter notoriously has one of the highest VO2 maxes ever recorded in all of human history. I mean, there's estimates of 94 that he got in Italy when he's being tested, and he's won every mountain race under the sun. Like, how does someone like me do that? And I'm good, but I'm not 94 VO2 max good. That's like, Olympic champion. And I think the shoes played a solidly large difference. And I think it's important that all of us in the modern era put respect on the names of our forebearers because they weren't playing with this technology.
Yeah, yeah. The pre-super shoe era, like I'm having a harder and harder time like remembering
Yeah.
now it's like, oh my gosh, like,
Well, yeah, just think about how much the body is protected too. Like, and trail super shoes are maybe a little different still. I think they're going to get there to the point that they're like the road super shoes. But for road super
mhm,
shoes, as a coach, I'm like, if you have the money or the capacity, and especially for pro athletes, I want you in super shoes for every workout. And
mhm,
it's not for the performance of the workout. I don't necessarily care about splits or anything. It's because the recovery rates are so much freaking faster. And so at 36, I think shoes like the Adidas Pro 3, the Nike Alpha Fly, that sort of thing have made it so that in my 20s again, speed wise. And in fact, I'm faster than I've ever been, like true speed. Like I showed up at the start, and after my little warm up, went back to Megan and Teddy Bross, my pacer and crew extraordinaire. And I was like, I think right now, if we change the format of this, I could run a 359 mile down Main Street. In Leadville. And, whether that's true or not, the point just being like,
like
I
you
think,
feel the pop.
and,
Like,
and just like my speed is better than ever. And I think a lot of that owes to like the types of training incentivized by these shoes.
yeah, that's definitely where I've landed with like super shoes and training is like it allows you to recover from the workout faster.
Yeah,
And especially as you apply that to an ultra when there's like active like muscle breakdown happening, especially later on in the race. It's like if we can have anything that continues to allow the legs and the muscles to like function in
definitely. Yeah.
any capacity, um, that's going to make a huge difference. I mean, the other thing too is like, I'm curious to hear your thoughts on this. Is that Speed Ultras, the shape of the shoe is pretty interesting
Yeah.
underfoot. Like it feels like very wobbly when you're just standing there because the heel
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
drops out so much.
I tried to do squats in them
Oh my,
early
why?
on when I had the shoe, and I almost fell down. I almost went backwards because the rocker is so intense on it.
On today's episode of I Shouldn't Be Alive right now, it's like
Yeah,
try to do
exactly.
squats and trail super shoes.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
I've been a little bit wary to go longer than like 50K or 50 mile in that shoe because I almost feel like I'm like working like my calves, like my lower calf and Achilles
Definitely.
more.
Yeah.
Did you get that feeling? And like how did that go like after mile 50? Like once you went over Hope Pass again?
So my big worry coming into the race, my only worry really was my calf muscles. So I think men as they age seem to have more calf issues in general. It's just
Mm,
something we see I think it's one of the first places that you start to lose muscle mass, and probably I should have doubled down a little bit more on strengthening and lengthening those types of muscles. But I've had more calf strain type issues in the Agravic Speed Ultras than I've had in any
mm.
other shoe. Also coincides with periods of high stress and other things. So it's not a controlled variable. But even the day before the race, I felt my calves on the little shakeout run I did.
Hmm.
Um, so I was concerned about it. And that being said, I do think during the race itself, I never had any issues. And part of that was because I was making sure not to get too far up on my toes
Mhm.
when I was running, because I have a tendency to be like a really toe off runner, and that's not efficient at all. And it's not good for health in most athletes, especially in these long events. But two, just the day before, I was like, oh, fuck, right now I just need to stretch out my calves and literally lengthen this muscle in an acute sense, because I sometimes just totally forget about my calf muscles. And once I did that, I actually woke up the next morning and it was fine and never felt them during the race. And I think what was really special about the shoe is like, you can even see this in the finish line video of me running. It's just like, it's clear that it doesn't, for at least for me, it doesn't feel like it sinks into the ground like other shoes, even other trail super shoes. Like I have to be the one putting out the effort for it. And I feel like this shoe just encourages me to be so light on my feet, have such quick ground reaction time. And obviously it's not changing my form for me, but there's something about that shape, I think, that when you fatigue, can actually be positive in a way that you can't really see till you're under that load.
So that was actually gonna be my next question is, once you started to get into the stages of the race where, like, shit just gets hard, like, even when you're
Yeah.
having, like, the best race of your life, it's, like, still 100 miles, like, you're still getting tired even if you're
Yeah.
under course record pace. Some super shoes, it seemed like, for some people, when your form starts to break down, then they get in the way. Like
Yeah.
I had that experience with the Nike Ultrafly at my
Mm,
2022 Western States when I started to blow up after Green Gate, and
yeah.
it was like absolutely not a blow up friendly shoe.
Well,
Um,
also, it's so heavy that
yeah,
like
that too. It just felt like I
I
was
hate
like
to.
bouncing everywhere.
I don't want to
Uh,
like talk shit about any shoe, but
well,
I
that's just
and
a number. I mean, it
yeah,
is
and
what
I
it
wore
is.
the ultra. I personally wore the Ultrafly because I've been very like, I'm always trying to be at the cutting edge of shoe stuff. I'm pretty obsessed with shoes. I'm very much, as Megan said on our podcast today, she was asking me about, well, if someone else said the Leadville course record, they'd probably be due for $100,000 shoe contract. Do you want to think about it? And I was like, no. And she's like, yeah. And I was just like, I love shoes too much. And then she's like, yeah, David, I think you're polyamorous for shoes.
You need to
So
get that Running Warehouse sponsorship.
yeah, exactly. It's like the feed for shoes.
Yes.
Um, so I wore Ultraflies last year, and they worked great for me in the race I wore them, but then I just couldn't get over the weight. Like
Mm.
objectively, the weight is just heavier than any shoe I ever run in. And studies are pretty unequivocal that that will reduce running economy. And then I can imagine when you get tired like that, it's going to be a hard shoe to run in.
Yeah.
So for me personally, with the Agravic Speed Ultra, at mile 71, we were running 6-minute pace on a little, like slightly like 1 or 2% downhill road, dirt road at the time. And God, I just remember thinking, I love this shoe. um, and after that I got tired, and it wasn't the shoe's fault. But yeah, I mean, never had issues. Other thing I found with them though is that I have to ankle tape when I use them pretty
Mm.
intensely. So I have a video that I made last week and put on our Patreon thingy about how I double bag ankle tape. So I ankle tape intensely even when I'm running on with them on non-technical trails, because I think one of the big criticisms you have heard of these shoes is that they do lead to way more ankle tipping. For the same reasons you're talking about, the way they feel underfoot. I can see this happening. Like I think this happened to Petter Engdahl a number of times, like both at Canyons and Western States.
Oh
And
yeah,
I've
he's
heard
got
this
some
happen to others too.
famous. He's got the famous ankle roll heard around the world picture from like
Oh, I didn't even know
OCC or
that.
CCC. Like
Oh shit.
UTMB posted it on their Instagram like the
Mm.
other day, where it's just like him and like his ankle is just like this to the ground.
Oh.
And I
Oh.
was like,
Oh.
oh my god, which with a
We've all been there.
prototype Speed Ultra, and I was like,
Yeah. Oh
what
my
what
God.
great advertising.
Yeah. So, I think ankle taping is another reason that this shoe is like then leveled up for me in my ranking of shoes. And it was just an absolute no brainer that I was going to wear it and not take it off the whole race, no matter what.
So you went one pair of shoes, one pair of socks, like you didn't touch them the whole
Yeah, I didn't
race.
touch anything. Literally,
Yeah.
when came into aid stations, I'm like, also, I was there to chase history, and with
Yeah.
the respect I have for Matt Carpenter, not just Matt, but like the others that have come after me who have gone for that record and, often missed by 10 hours because it's pretty stout, or at least, has historically been that way. I didn't want to waste time. And also, I don't know, coaching these a lot, more and more, I'm just like, the focus on logistics and all that in ultras, it is good to a certain extent, but simplify, 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 make it as simple as possible, make it as fun as possible. And for me, that's coming into an aid station, get water dumped on me, drop my gels out, gels put back in, bottles down, bottles back in my hands. And so just a waist belt with gels, and a bottle in the back, bottle in my hand, and go.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, keep it simple. Like
Yeah, well, I
don't worry
mean,
about
and everybody's
overthinking
different.
it.
Everybody's different. I just think like sometimes aid stations are not an oasis. Like they are, it's like the sirens in Odysseus or
Oh
whatever, the
yeah.
Odyssey.
Mm.
It's like, no, I mean, yes, they sound really, really good, but sitting in that chair, like, I think it's an illusion when it helps
You
people.
gotta get out of
I
there.
think I think it's an illusion when they get in a chair and then get back up and then they're like, oh, that chair helped me. It's like, actually, you would have been great if you had just been a little bit more efficient and had a little bit more cold water dumped on your head.
I mean, that's great advice. I mean,
I'm being intense.
uh,
I'm being like, you can tell I'm very comfortable with Brett because like most of the podcasts I'm on, I'm very much like,
it's
whatever
okay.
works for
Take
you.
your
There's
time.
a lot of different, yeah, take your time, all that. And at this one, I'm like, I think one of the big advantages is Megan was there, and Megan was just absolutely, it was like an F1 crew stop every time, all the way to the finish. Like, and that adds up. Like someone's going to be incredibly good. Is going to go after this course record, I'm sure, next year. And I bet it's going to be within a few minutes. And we're all going to be thinking about aid stations at that point.
Yeah, absolutely. Last question about shoes, because then I
Mhm.
wanna talk about nutrition a little bit. I know that we were messaging back and forth, and there was, we were thinking maybe the Tecton X3 was gonna be the
Yeah.
perfect, shoe for level. You ended up not choosing it. Why didn't you end up wearing the Tecton X3 on this course?
This shows why I could never do a shoe sponsorship, because Brett, my knight in shining armor, was able to get me the Tecton X3s, and I'm a Hoka fan. I love Hoka. And I love their shoes and I love the way they fit. And I've loved the Tecton for the shape. It just isn't enough cushion for me. And so when the Tecton X3 came out with the PIBA foam, it sounded like my dream shoe, even with that dumb upper, or the dumb gator that makes no sense. And so I got it and I put it on and I was like, okay, yes, the gator is the dumbest thing I've ever seen, but the shoe itself is amazing. And so I wore it for a run on terribly nasty trails here in Boulder, like the hardest trails that no one knows about. And the trails that we use to send athletes to train for like the hardest races in the world. We're talking Barkley, stuff like that. And they climbed like a dream right off the bat. And I was very impressed. They were soft, which I like in a shoe. And this plate adds some, obviously propulsion and stability to it. And then I went across a creek. And after that creek, the shoe was never quite the same for me personally. And then when I got back home and weighed it on the scale, because I, of course, have a little kitchen scale to measure my shoes because I'm a freak like that. Of course. The shoe was still retaining more weight from the water than I would expect. And that overlapped with how I felt, that my foot was more soggy than I'd expect. And yes, maybe it's because I had shitty socks from Amazon that were cotton. And maybe that's the socks fault. But the shoe itself still did gain that weight. And, that confirmation for me was a reminder that like sometimes an ultra is the best shoe is not the one that even tests best on like a treadmill economy test, which I always like to do for these shoes and did for both of these. It's the shoe that performs best in the real world when thrown through a bunch of crap. And whereas the Tecton X3 felt a little bit less good in water for me, the Agravic Speed Ultra, it was like dry in an instant. I mean, almost why it probably relates to why you feel like the upper is a little bit almost non-secure. Probably that same thing leads to a shoe that just like feels like you just walk over water on it.
Yeah, and you messaging me and being like, dude, this shoe's like holding on to water so long. That motivated me to go run through some creeks and
Yeah.
see what was going on. And
What'd you find?
you're totally right. It's something in the shoe keeps it staying soggy. And I even did a couple like very like I crossed a couple very low creeks where I didn't even get the gator wet, and it was still pretty soggy. And then I eventually soaked the full gator, and it seems like the upper is draining the water well.
It's the
Like
sole?
there's something
Yeah.
underfoot is like sponge soaking the water,
Maybe it's
and
even the insole. But what I'm concerned about is maybe it's
yeah,
even the midsole foam. And
that's what I think it might be.
if midsole foam absorbs water, obviously in a trail race, that's a different story because like at Leadville, for example, on the backside of Hope Pass, it was a hot day for altitude. It got up to 79 at one point, high sun, which if you've ever been up to 10,000 feet, that feels like you're on the surface of Mars or something. And so every creek that I came across, I was in the middle of it and down and dirty. I was doing freaky moves in those creeks. The minnows there, they're going to have stories to tell. And, I never once thought about the Agravic Speed Ultras
Yeah.
and how they incorporated that water. And again, I overthink this stuff so much. So please, if anyone's listening, know the X3 is a great shoe. And I think it's clearly already been worn for championship results. But I think that probably I'd be curious to know if you know, Brett, do the people that have worn it, do they change their shoes during the race? Because my guess is that it would be a type of shoe that rewards changing your shoe because it's holding onto water from creek crossings a few miles before.
Yeah, and that's something I'm really curious about because, well, so there was, I think 0. I'm gonna lean on this made up stat right now. There was 0 Hoka athletes wearing the Tecton X3 at Western
Yeah.
States this year. They were all wearing the 2.5, and that was largely due to the Tecton X3s not getting to the hands of the athletes quite soon enough. So then they got extra 2.5s.
So the 2.5s was the 3 on Ludo what did Ludo wear at Hard Rock?
The 2.5.
Interesting. Okay. So
And then Jim was
that actually
wearing the
makes me feel good.
2.5 as well.
That makes me feel good because
Yeah.
I was worried that I was just being like wildly idiotic, given that all these races have lots of water and no one talked about it. So, maybe it's not an issue, but for me at least, I hate the feeling of soggy feet. And so it became key.
Yeah, so there's something going on that, I'll try and get to the bottom of this of like why it's taking forever to drain out. But yeah, something to be aware of. I mean, where I live, there's like no water here, so my feet hardly
Okay.
ever get wet. So that's why, like
Yeah,
Waldo
perfect.
100K, like my feet didn't
Perfect
get
shoe
wet
for
at Waldo, so it was
perfect
good.
California shoe, you
Hmm.
know? And
Totally.
also, I as much as I love Hoka, and I keep wanting to caveat that, what is up with Gator?
Dude, I
Why?
love the Gator.
What, Brett? I don't want non-consensual Gators. Like Gators are great. You don't need it built into the shoe.
So
It doesn't, it adds weight. It adds weight guaranteed. Even if it's a small amount of weight, it'll always absorb water because it's some sort of cloth-like structure. And who needs it?
I hear
Who
you.
needs
I
that?
I hear you. I hear you for sure.
Leadville's
But
sandy as hell. Leadville is so sandy. Never once was like, oh, and you went through tons of creeks. There's sand in my shoe. In
see,
fact, when I
you
took
must
them
have
off,
tough feet.
and maybe I do have foot privilege. So yeah,
Like
sorry if that's
in
true.
Ashland, there is not a single rock on the trails here in town. So like anytime I race anywhere else, my feet get shredded because there's just stuff underfoot, and like
Yeah.
you throw in then one more little pebble and just things explode. So then for me having the Gator and like being able to not have to worry about stuff getting in my shoes been like a dream come true, because like I'm already getting enough foot problems as is. So then to just like
Mm,
keep some of that debris out, because like that's like the one negative about running here in Ashland is like you get soft little tender baby feet because it is just like absolute pristine butter single
uh,
track everywhere.
I don't know.
So that's
I lived in California for a long time.
see,
That's not very single track.
there's even more rocks out in the Palo Alto trails than in Ashland. It's amazing. It's wild.
I just I just want to do my comedy bits on gators that are built
Yeah.
into shoes. But I mean, but seriously, from a perspective of the shoe company, I do not understand solving for a problem that does not exist.
I will see. Yeah.
No one is asking for a shoe that has this thing we can already do.
I
And
was shocked
it
that they actually did that.
in a performance shoe, it's truly bonkers to me. And it concerns me because I doubt that any top professional athletes are telling them that this is a need and are giving them that feedback. And so it worries me about everything in a shoe because I'm like, the Agravic Speed Ultra, say what you want about it, and it definitely has its limitations, was clearly designed with years of athlete feedback. And it clearly will not work for maybe 75% of runners, just understanding that it didn't work for me for a while until I figured it out. But I get worried when decisions start to be made at shoe companies from places other than performance, especially in a shoe that's designed for performance, like because that's the only purpose to have a super shoe.
Mhm.
Otherwise, like you could buy a shoe that doesn't cost, your seventh mortgage or whatever. So yeah, I don't know. I'm talking about shit
I
I don't
think
understand, and it
I
reminded
think it
everybody.
might be it's one
Yeah,
person's fault. It's the
yeah,
one person who had lots of feedback on the shoe.
yeah.
That would be Mr. Jim Walmsley. I think Jim is the
Oh,
person to be talking to about this Gator, because his custom Tecton, what is now the X 2.5 that he wore last year at UTMB, was like a full PIBA shoe with the built-in Gator. Like
yeah.
it must be
Well,
him.
okay, then I take everything back. I'm the ultimate Jim worshiper. I think he's the
Yeah, how do you
best.
feel now that it might be potentially Jim's
I'm
fault that the
thinking
shoe
that
is a
I'm
Gator?
probably wrong. I've probably been wrong this whole time.
Like,
Um,
are you changing your mind like actively in
oh no,
real
I mean
time?
absolutely. I'm open minded on things, especially when someone that, I mean, I think the Leadville CR puts me on the map in ways, but in ways that like I wasn't before. But Jim is so much better than me, like so much better than me. That and also trains better, trains harder, better person. I love Jim. You can tell I love Jim. So I take it all back. I repent. Forgive me, Father, for I have sinned.
For I have Jimmed.
Yeah, yeah, I have.
Um, okay, so Terrex Agravic Speed Ultra. You were rocking the swap kit.
Yeah, just
Um,
basic t-shirt, John
yeah.
G shorts. That had so I think the one interesting thing about my clothing, and then there's cheap socks, same ones,
Oh my
um,
gosh.
because they're the thicker ones that help lock down the shoe for
You're
me.
right. Right.
But they cost like $2. And then so I probably do have foot privilege. I'm just realizing now. The John G shorts were actually really helpful. So they have a built-in belt liner where I could put things throughout the race, in addition to then a naked belt on top of it. So I essentially had two belts built in, and the John G belt was great because if you weigh down a naked belt too
Mm.
much with bottles and gels, it'll bounce around and it's not quite as efficient. You'd have to wear a vest. And I don't like vests. They feel like I'm being strangled by a small puppy. Um, But with the Janji, I could carry, 10 gels and 2 bottles and not have any concerns.
Dual belt. You're
Yeah.
stacking belts.
Stack belts on belts on
Oh
belts.
my gosh.
Yeah, could you do 3? But yeah, so for me, that was clutch because so essentially in the Janji belt, I would have my caffeinated gels and my electrolytes. And then in the naked belt, I would just have my calorie gels in my bottle. And the combo was awesome because there was zero bouncing the whole time. And if you look at any of the videos of me in the race, like I feel like most people are like, he's not carrying anything. And it's like, yeah, I
Yeah.
was carrying a ton of stuff all the time. But that setup was just so sleek and secure against my body.
Wow. That's awesome. That's like a brain blast right there of just like double belt.
Oh, man. The cool thing
Yeah,
about
you
coaching
mentioned
is, yeah, I
yeah.
mean, it's almost unfair sometimes the fact that through coaching, Megan and I have gotten to guess and test, so many more times than we ever could with ourselves. So you learn from athletes, right? You hear from an athlete who's really, you coach some athlete who has like a 160 IQ or something and has come up with this wild solution to a problem. And you're like, oh, I'll try that. And it's like, oh, that one didn't
Yeah.
work, but then this one did. And so, I think a lot of people are saying, oh, that's a debut 100. What? It's like, oh, well, it doesn't feel that way because I've gotten to learn from athletes, both like in terms of races, but then these logistic ends of the spectrum, which really do matter in this race, and is why I'm able to have such quick aid station turnarounds, for example.
Yeah, yep, definitely. So you mentioned that, it looked like you weren't carrying a lot of stuff. You were carrying a lot of stuff. Nutritionally,
Yeah.
I saw a reel on the feed or yeah, reel from the feed where you're talking
Yeah.
about you were hitting upwards of 120 grams of carbs per hour.
Yeah.
How did you do that? How were you doing that? Like,
So,
what
yeah,
was the consumption?
I think it just gets back to like clearly a lot of the performance changes that we've seen at the top end of sports are related to something outside of running. And it's most emblematic in cycling. Cycling has seen the same performance jump in both men's and women's racing. And I think in cycling, a lot of times people can say, oh, that's due to a performance enhancing drug or whatever. And it's like, okay, I always thought that too. But then you're seeing it in running and you're seeing it with athletes who I know for a fact are not cheating. And I know for a fact I'm not cheating. I know for a fact that every athlete that I coach, I mean, I don't know that for a fact because you never know anything about, outside of yourself, but like I would bet my, everything I own on that outcome. And then other athletes that like Adam Peterman is not doing anything wrong. You know what I mean? Like you just know, like it's just these people's character is so great. And every other endurance sport is seeing the same thing. It's like, well,
Yeah.
what connects those endurance sports? One thing, fueling.
Mm.
And the fueling revolution in endurance sports is a wave we're all riding. And I've as soon as I realized the extent of this, I was like, I need to be at the cutting edge and see what's possible. Because that's the weird part is the studies have said 120 grams of carbs per hour because that's as much as we've tested. We don't
Mm.
actually know that's the limit. So
Oh god, please let that be the limit.
Victor Campenarts at the Tour de
Oh,
France this
man.
year, he
Yeah.
won a stage with 136 grams per hour and got up to 150. And yes, he's a strong guy pushing very high watts. That's different than ultras because his output's so high, the fire's burning so hot, whereas in 100 it's just not burning that hot. But for me, I knew that to compete with Matt Carpenter, I would have to push my effort pretty high, and to push my effort pretty high and disrespect the distance. Essentially, how could do you
Mhm.
disrespect the distance? It's by having enough fuel on board that you're not going to bonk, that you're efficient enough that you're in Z2, which means you'll be burning around 400, 500 calories an hour. Get up to 400 to 500 in carbs, you'll be golden. So, I was probably around, I mean, it's scary to think, but 500 to 600 calories an hour until the very end of the race. And yeah, it worked well. I mean, I think Leadville's known for its nausea, and I definitely was dealing with that pretty intensely in the last 15 miles. But I think it's par for the course, no matter how you approach it.
Yeah. Yeah, totally. And then, like, once that nausea does set in, good thing you've been fueling such
Yeah.
high carbs all the way leading up to that point.
Well, and I mean, I guess so. We call it slurping, and I think partially one thing that people sometimes don't talk about, and on our podcast, we try to, as Brett knows, we try to talk about everything in such an honest and open way that like nothing's a secret. But how do you do it? Like, I could not do this with a normal gel. I need to do this with gels that go down extremely easy. So for me, the two go-tos are Science and Sport Beta Fuel, which is magic, and precision gels for caffeine primarily. So with Science and Sport Beta Fuel, what we call slurping is you can actually squirt it down past your palate once you get palate fatigue. And so I'm basically taking these as like a college kid might take a shot of vodka.
Yeah.
So even when I get nauseous later on, I can take them without having that retching experience. And I mean, it's clear there's a reason that everyone in cycling is using science and sport or precision. Like it's when they have the option, it's like magical stuff. And other companies are catching up. Basically, the big advantage I have over Matt Carpenter is that he was blending power bars into water bottles, and I'm getting to take rocket fuel.
Yeah. And I guess the other thing too is like the precision gels are 30 grams of carbs a pop,
Yeah.
and the science and sport are 40 grams of carbs a pop. So it's like per hour, you don't like you only have to do like 3 things.
Yeah. So what I was doing was 40, 40, 30
Mm,
every 20 minutes, supplementing that with, and then didn't have a single sip of water. It was all scratch or scratch and then some scratch mixed with precision tabs. So I was having electrolytes on top of scratch. So I was basically doing a lot of everything.
yeah.
And, thus you do the math on that. And it's like those numbers start to add up real fast. And that's something you have to train just like you train your body. And, it's something that like, I think looking back, I think people will look at my Strava and be like, "How did you do that?" Like Killian came out with a training manual last week of, the minimum weeks he was doing was 25 hours. Matt Carpenter was
Mhm.
running 2 hours every single day year round, and doing doubles and workouts on top of that. We all know how the best in the sport train. And what Swap has essentially tried to say is like, yes, that works very well. It's not to say that but didn't say it's not the only way to do it. If you can optimize your running economy and work on the things that are your limiters,
Mhm.
then sometimes the mileage limiter, which is the easiest to anchor onto because we don't have a gels Strava, we have a miles bar on your Strava. Um, it can be the one that seems like most clear that to increase is the volume. But there's like 8 million bars if we had a Strava for them that matter as much for developing that fitness. Running economy being the primary one that is not just volume dependent, and then the secondary one being fueling. And so, what we try to focus on, like more than almost anything else, is how can we get this substrate on board so that in the races we can just have it be a math equation where our running economy is up here and we know that we can operate at a certain percent of our lactate threshold or our aerobic threshold depending on the length of the event. And as long as we're getting in 100 to 120 grams of carbs per hour. And so I had to work it hard. And then again, I'm sure it gets back to I might have a GI genetic talent when it comes to that, in the same way that other people have a VO2 max genetic talent.
I think that's a good thing. A good thing that you had mentioned as well was you've practiced this. Like this is
Yeah,
not
you have
a
to.
I'm saving 120 grams of carbs per hour until race day sort of thing. Like for anyone listening, like don't do that. Like
No, no, you would.
you
It's
train
not good. Not good.
train for it. You have to
Yeah,
train
and
for it.
yeah, and it's not you don't overtrain for it. Like most of my runs, I don't feel at all. I mean, I eat normally and I eat tons of food. Like we're all about eating as much food as you can basically all the time. But I also want my fat oxidation to be capable. So when I'm going out on a normal 12-mile run where my heart rate's 130, like I'm very rarely going to take any calories on that run for myself
Mhm.
because that's a male athlete. For female athletes, it's different because the endocrine demands are different. So female athletes should basically be fueling every run over an hour in our experience and our knowledge. Male athletes like Killian, for example, does training on lower fuel. I think that's fine too. But for me, anytime I am doing an effort that is high Z2 or above and is more than 90 minutes, I try to lock into this is going to be how I feel on race day as much as is reasonable in the context of like the logistical demands of, running in the mountains.
Totally. Yep. Um, yeah, that's
And then
awesome. I
maybe the
mean,
last thing is
yeah,
like that fueling approach starts to break down if your effort levels are lower. So it probably breaks
right.
down for some athletes if they're not trained to the point that they're confident they can push harder throughout the race. And so in hundreds, like it especially starts to get a little weird because if you're doing 100 grams per hour and you're operating in your zone one, and thus your glycogen burn rates are pretty low, you're going to have all of this underutilized carbohydrate, which is fine. That can actually help the brain perform. But over the course of a race, that is going to end in GI disaster.
Mhm.
Thankfully, I think probably what happened with me is I was close enough to that balance point of burn and take in that it was in, out, in, out, in, out. My body was just
Mhm.
using what came in. And what ended up making me nauseous and have to vomit after the race was more due to just miscalculating liquids, which is such a harder equation because the
Yeah.
calories, it's basically a math equation. The liquids can be so variable on the day.
Totally. Yep. Yeah. Yeah, that's awesome to like hear like such firsthand uh knowledge of just the benefits of eating a lot of food
Well,
before,
it's fun.
during, after.
It was just like applying, the science in a way that is at the true margins of human performance, right? Like what's so fun for me is all I care about is what are people capable of? I don't care about what I'm capable of or course records at the end of the day. I'm like, I get as excited as someone hitting a cutoff for the first time. It's the coolest shit in the world. But what's fun is this fueling stuff is just really hard to study. I mean, it is
Mhm.
impossible to study someone on course record pace at Leadville. It's never going to happen.
Yeah.
And so what we get is real world anecdotes mixed with the background of the physiological studies. And we've had this theory all along that you don't need, I mean, I think my average training volume was 8 or 9 hours a week, probably 10 hours a week at the most. Um, I like you look at my Strava, it doesn't seem possible, but you know what does seem possible? Like if you eat enough, who knows? And so my theory, here's a fun Brett tip.
Ooh, all right.
Did I have the most calories per hour ever in an ultra in a 100 miler? I don't know.
100
I
miles.
mean, I don't know the history of that, but I think it's possible. I think there's a
I think
chance.
so.
And I'm not a huge guy.
I haven't heard of many instances of people like obviously pushing 100, plus grams of carbs an hour.
I think I was probably 130 a lot of hours too. So basically, thank God for the feed. If we didn't have the feed, I would be bankrupt right now. And so there are ways to do this. Yeah, it's the
Boom.
feed is the best. And that's been and I think one reason that my breakthrough came this year is that it's the year we partnered with the feed, and I was able to experiment with all the different things and found exactly what works for me: scratch, precision, science, and sport. And
Yeah.
that's it. And I didn't consume a single other ounce of anything else other than that stuff during the race.
Just all rocket fuel all day.
All rocket fuel all the time. And honestly, that's doing it. I was like, I don't know if my stomach goes south. I don't know if anything's going in. I don't know. So I had Megan the day before the race is like, David, you need to get real food. I don't care if you're planning on running the whole thing and having only rocket fuel. And so we went to Walmart in Frisco, Colorado, and got Reese's Big Cups because they have
Oh,
4 grams of protein. And I was like, I feel like a Reese's big cup would always be good.
if things go south, I'm just gonna go for the big cup.
Yeah, exactly. Basically, we should, how like they say have an emergency kit in your house in case there's like a zombie apocalypse or something.
Yeah.
Um, Basically, my emergency kit is just going to be Reese's Big Cups. It's like
It'll
things are
be like
south.
the in case of emergency break glass, and it'll just be like a
Yeah, yeah,
Reese's big cup in there. You just have those like all over your house, like down the hallway and stuff.
exactly. I might not get a shoe sponsorship out of this, but I damn well hope there's a candy sponsorship.
Yeah, I'm sure all of the candy execs are watching Conversational Pace trail shoe
Oh, for
reviews.
sure.
I'm sure.
Our demographic is Mars third floor, not executive level, but like middle management.
Which is
It'll work
like,
its way up.
yeah, it'll get there for sure. I've got two more things.
Yeah.
The first one is cooling,
Mhm.
because you said it was warm out there, and I saw when I was watching the race via Instagram and Athlinks tracker. So sad that there wasn't a live stream. That's a whole nother topic. I did see multiple times, like when you would come through the aid station, like Megan would, just like dump an entire pitcher of water on you as you were on your way out. What was the cooling strategy like for you out on the race?
So this is a place where I did drop the ball a little, and all these logistic things were not that dialed in because I hate ice bandanas. I hate ice against my skin. I just hate the feeling of it, and I know I need to get used to it, but I never want to practice it
Okay,
because I don't
you're
feel like
not
cold
alone.
water.
You're not alone. I
It's
hate it too.
okay. Yeah, and as a coach, I'm like, you need to cool logistically with ice when it's over 60 degrees, right? The science is pretty unequivocal that cooling is indispensable even at low temperatures, or at high temperatures or low temperatures. But for me, I just did get wet every chance I got
Mhm.
and then just stay really hydrated. So the cooling was low key, but I also think it saved a lot of time, which was clutch because it's warm, but it's not like blazing hot. And then eventually cloud cover came in and that helped a lot. So
Okay.
um, it's not Western states where you're getting these insane temperatures. And I think I got lucky to a certain extent that at mile 85 or so, after I hit a major low point, the clouds came out. And
Mm.
once that happened, temps were still, but like high altitude 78 in clouds is like 78. High altitude
Yeah.
78 in sun is like terrible. And so that also probably made a big difference and made it so that I wasn't punished. I think that was probably the place where I got lucky, is
Okay.
that didn't backfire. And I was very heat trained too coming into the race, both for performance reasons in terms of blood volume, but at altitude, but then also, just making sure that I was ready to go. So I was hot tub boy for that.
Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, it sounds like what you did then, especially like getting wet out on course every opportunity you could, sounded like
Yeah.
it did enough to keep the core temp from
Yeah.
rising.
Well, and the effort was pretty low too.
Yeah.
So, the thing with hundreds is like the effort should be controlled. And because this race is at high altitude and the hardest parts of it are at very high altitude, like it's okay. You can kind of play with fire like that. So yeah, I need to get a little better with ice if I do decide to try to do one of the other big races. But for now, I just love a little wet t-shirt contest and get out that door.
Okay. So then that brings us to my last question for you, which we did this. We didn't do this on purpose. But then we ended up asking like everyone we interviewed for Western
Yeah.
states. We did a marry, kiss, or kill
Marry, kiss, or kill.
of, and this was pertaining to Western states. This is now pertaining to Leadville. So the
Okay, it's gonna be great.
marry, kiss, or kill, high carb fueling, topical cooling, trail super shoes.
Oh, kill topical cooling for sure. Also, I just don't think it's as essential in the broad scale of performance as the other two. Like you can get by without it. It's not going to make or break you as long as you're
Mhm.
able to you know, do something out there. So then we got marry or kiss for
Yep.
super shoes and high carb fueling.
Yep.
Dude, I want to fuck super shoes so hard. Let's be honest here. Anyone who's heard me talk about shoes gets it. I'm like, damn, that Piba foam. I don't know. So I think that's the most obvious one. And then marry high carb fueling because that's just a lifelong health and wellness journey. High carb fueling cares about me as much as I care about it. Super shoes
Uh,
don't give a crap about me. That's a one-way relationship. That's the pornography of the shoe market.
a beautiful breakdown of marry, kiss, or kill. Um,
We need to. I feel like someone's going to clip that out and use it to cancel me at some point in the future.
oh, it's gonna be me.
Okay, perfect.
I'm gonna. Well, no, I'll clip it out and just use it as like the main reel for this episode,
Oh, perfect.
so
Yeah,
that
yeah,
way it can't be like reused again. Because then someone will be like, "Oh, I already saw that," you know.
yeah, yeah. You'll use it so it'll be like you'll have done the opposition research on me, so
Would it?
that all of the haters that apparently are out there. And
Yeah.
yes, I have gotten eight. I've seen the 8 million comments on things like, "Oh, what are the haters going to say now?" Is like the haters don't give a shit. I don't even know who you're talking about.
It's a preemptive rebuttal. That's what it is.
Exactly. I like
Yep.
that. So you know, I'll be over here putting like some fine lubrication on the gaiters of my X3s, just like rubbing them down because even though I've said some bad things about them, they're so sexy.
Yeah. So you will find yourself logging some miles in the Tecton X3 still.
Yeah, miles. As we said, like in the Marry Kiss Kill
Yes.
framework, some kissing miles
Miles.
for sure.
Yeah, gosh, there's too many dirty gator jokes that
I've
can
been
be
egging you
made
on,
now.
Brett. How have you not taken the bait yet?
I know it's now only hitting me of the gator. Oh man. Oh gosh. Well, that sounds like a pretty good place to put a pin in it. Dude,
Yeah.
thank you so
Well,
much for
I'm
chatting.
excited. Thanks so much for what you do. I'm really excited for Hoka's next shoe because they're going to master the Gator. They're going to master Gator.
The Master Gator.
Yeah.
Master
I
Gator
landed the plane.
technology. Oh man, you crushed that one. David, thank you so
No,
much for chatting
yeah.
gear
And
with me.
Brett, truly love you so much, man. Like you've been so supportive of me for so long and just a background way that you are for everybody in the community. And it means the absolute world to know you're out there. So keep doing what you're doing. And to everybody listening, love you guys too. What a journey we're on.